Good afternoon, good evening, good morning from wherever you're joining us today. I'm Fabio Braga. I'm a Senior Cloud Solution Architect for Data and AI at Microsoft, and welcome to another Microsoft Reactor Sydney livestream. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and recognize their continuing connection to the land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Data governance is the topic of today. It's becoming an increasingly important business challenge for organizations with complex data environments. So today, we'll be having a one-of-a-kind conversation with thought leaders in this field. On that note, I would like to welcome Kate Carruthers. She's the Chief Data Insights Officer for the University of Sydney, in New South Wales in Sydney, and she's also an adjunct senior lecturer in the School of Computer Science and Engineering. Jordan Templeton, he's the CTO of Aware Group, and he's leading the technology focusing on AI, BI, and IoT, headquartered in New Zealand, with teams in Singapore and the US. He has a keen interest in the combination of AI, IoT, having specialized in architecture of these solutions for over 10 years. And Dr. Greg Lowe, the well-known Dr. Greg Lowe, one of the better-known database consultants in the world. In addition to deep technical skills, he's got a lot of experience with business and project manager, and he's known for his pragmatic approach to solving issues. So this session will be approximately 60 minutes, with about 10-15 minutes of those dedicated for questions from the audience. So please send us your questions. Here, I would like to ask you to keep your mics muted and your cameras off. The session is being recorded, so if you want to ask a question, either raise your hand or put your questions in the Q&A section. And my colleagues, Sarah Orrell and Shiva Ford, will help me convey your questions to the panelists today. At the conclusion of this session, we'll share a link with you for the survey in the Q&A section. So if you also like to reference this session today, again, the recording will be available in our YouTube channel over the next few days. Right. So for now, let's begin. So let me address Kate, Jordan, Greg. Thank you very much for joining us today. To talk about data governance. We have 1 hour to discuss a few topics, and I would love for you guys to share your insights and your experience as briefly as possible so we can make time for everyone to give their opinions and answer some questions from the audience. All right. There you go. So let's for now, let's begin. So let me start with you, Kate. Often we hear on news websites or on TV about social media privacy concerns, or even about major data leaks that exposed personal or financial data from a lot of people, right, or organizations. So can I get your opinion on why proper data governance is so important for organizations around the world?
Thanks, Fabio. The most important thing about data governance is it tells you what you need to secure. So it considers your data as an asset, and it ensures that you can manage it as an asset so that you know what you've got and what level of classification it needs to be held at, and then how you can secure it. So good data governance is the foundation for good cybersecurity and information security. And that is the reason why you do it. That's the only reason you need to do it. Then on top of that, you can build really good data and analytics programs and stuff, but the real reason is protecting your data. And organizations that had good data governance wouldn't be subject to those kind of breaches because they would know what was important and would have protected it based on their data governance program.
That's a good one. I like that. So how about you, Greg? What your thoughts are on this topic? You're mute, Greg.
Obviously, yeah, I quite agree with Kate. The only thing I find is that in Australia, there are far more breaches that occur that people aren't aware of. And I find that itself is a problem, right? And so what tends to happen, I've often sort of commented that I think until a few more CEOs get sort of like barbecued on four corners or something, I don't think they'll take it as seriously. My biggest concern is that there are not enough consequences when it goes wrong, and more importantly, just simply when it's done wrong.
All right, so you think it's important of kind of stronger regulations around data governance, right?
Well, even where there are regulations, they're nowhere near tight enough. So, for example, in Australia today, if you have a breach, you can often have up to a month or so that while people are in theory investigating the breach, to not have to notify people that it has occurred, right? And you'd realise that in any substantial breach, from the time you're aware of it to another month later is just way too long, you know, in terms of someone being able to take any reasonable action in terms of it.
Okay, that's interesting. That's really interesting. So, Jordan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with both, but I guess to add to that, data is that strategic asset that you build within the business. The technology kind of supports access to that and enables people to do things with that data. But there's a fine balance between giving people too much and letting them do whatever they want, and then putting too many rules in place that they can't actually do their job. So from my point of view, data governance is what allows you to make that balance actually work for the best interest of people doing their job, but also for the business as well.
That's right. That's right. I think from that perspective, data is such an important asset for many organizations as part of that digital transformation. That's what it fuels digital transformation for many organizations, and it just kind of corroborating what you guys mentioned. It is a very important asset, and it should be taken care of, and have the proper protection in place to make sure it's not kind of misused. There you go. I like the discussion. So let's move on here and switch gears. Maybe let me start with you, Greg, on this one. For most of the technology solutions, right? So the pillars of success are people, process, and technology, right? So you have to address these three pillars for something to be successful. So related to data governance, how much effort would you put in each one of these pillars to build a successful data governance plan?
I think there's obviously a mixture of possibilities there, but in terms of the processes are things that have to be embedded within an organization over a long period of time. And they have to be sort of standards that are believed in and pushed from upper levels of the company as well. In fact, one of the things that's different about data and if people doing development with data as opposed to applications is if you look at what people do with applications, they often sort of chop and change and completely change frameworks and throw away everything they do on a pretty regular basis. But if you look at what happens with data in organizations tends to live on for a very long time. I think it's usually one of the most valuable things the organization owns. And it never really tends to sort of stop and start. It tends to, and get replaced, it tends to sort of more morph from shape to shape over time. It might go through different application systems. But one of the beauties of that is it means that you have plenty of time to consider the management and the governance of that data, because it's not like you're sort of dropping and recreating it every year or two.
That. So Jordan, how about your thoughts?
I think people are pretty core to all of that, given that they're the ones who eventually consume all the data, and they're the ones who have to kind of follow the rules that go in place. I do agree with what Greg was saying around the data living on for such a long time. It's not like you can kind of throw your data away and start again tomorrow and get the same kind of value out of it. So the data governance framework really provides the rules and the standards to be followed, and then the technology and people kind of live by that.
I like that. Kate.
I suppose the real ideal for this is that it becomes embedded in culture. And, you know, there's the old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you can get the process and the technology embedded in the culture so that people just say that's how we do stuff around here, that's the goal. With my own data governance program, you know, we're finally, after 7 years, starting to get to the point where people just go, oh, we have to do a data sharing agreement for that, or oh, we need to do a data governance review, we need to do data classification. So it's starting to get embedded in the culture, and so the policies and procedures are the necessary first steps, as Greg alluded to, but getting it so that it's how we do stuff around here and it's just embedded is the nirvana. And that does take time. So, you know, you can't build culture, you can't build stuff into the culture in a minute. It takes time, and that means that you need to have consistency of policy and consistency of top-down support for the policy and procedures. So I think that's the important bit, and that's the secret sauce that brings the whole policy people, the process people and technology together.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. So Greg, do you have any thoughts on what Kate just mentioned now?
Yeah, I think, look, what I'd add to that, as said, I keep pushing a sort of a top-down thing, because what troubles me is I see lots of organizations where they pay lip service to doing the right thing, but then they don't, you know, and that deeply troubles me. I mean, sometimes it's just, I don't know, ignorance, or maybe willful ignorance, but for example, if they have data, I saw a column in a database the other day that said encrypted TFN, right? And so this is meant to be an encrypted tax file number, but it was a 14-character field as characters, right? And so anyone who knows anything about encryption knows that's not anything encrypted. And so what the developers have actually done is sort of roll their own obfuscation method, but it's interesting that they called the outcome encrypted, right? And so, you know, there are layers of responsibility, but there should be a layer at which somebody looks at that, presumably a team leader level, and goes, I don't think so.
Yeah, in my experience, when you look at those three pillars, right, people, process, and technology, I agree with all the three of you in terms of having kind of strong culture is essential for the success of the governance. Technology, the tool that is going to help you, it's not enough. And Jordan, I believe you have done some work before in terms of the cultural aspects of data governance that you wanted to comment on that once, or how the experience went.
Yeah, we've gone through that process a couple of times with a few customers. And what's interesting is not only per business how that culture is different, but also the cultural influence from the country itself. So we do a lot of work in Southeast Asia and all around Asia Pacific, and the differences in the mindset and the support from country regulations as well. So for example, a customer in New Zealand, we recently just got a revision to the Privacy Act here in New Zealand, which means that as a part of that change, there are actually an executive who are ultimately responsible for owning data, owning the security and privacy of that data, and almost like, and it's hard to put a title on it, but someone who owns the ethical use of that information as well. That's always a tough one to crack. But what's interesting is that with that responsible executive, you now have a bit of buy-in there, because the consequences are quite dire in New Zealand. No one has been put in jail yet, but if you don't responsibly disclose a breach, for example, or you don't put the protections in place to prevent a breach, that executive level can actually be held accountable for that. So in New Zealand, at least, we're seeing a bit of a fast forward in terms of people scrambling to start putting these methods in place. But then in other areas of the world, we're actually seeing it happening quite naturally through a couple of different methods.
That's right. We see a lot of news around legislation in Europe with GDPR, and some companies actually being fined. Some getting some hefty fines because of these breaches and in the legislation there. So I think it's a step in the right direction to enforce a strong culture and strong liability for data privacy issues. Fully agreed. Just checking here with Shiva and Sarah if we have any questions on a Q&A.
None so far, all good.
Right, awesome. Anyone else in the audience would like to raise their hands and come on audio to ask a question? No, not yet. Okay, so let's keep moving forward then. Right, guys, you guys have a kind of a lot of experience together, right? So kind of the collection of your success stories and projects pointing to this next question. So tell me about one of your real life experiences where you had a situation where proper data governance was in place and that saved the day, right? Or quite the opposite, where data governance wasn't there and that caused some trouble. Can you talk about some of the situations that you've been involved in, cast your memory back and share with us? So let me start with you, Jordan.
Okay, I've got one example in my mind. Unfortunately, I can't say too many of the details. I'll hope you can kind of pick out the story of what's going on here. Essentially, in this organization, they have a lot of customers who regularly come back to them each year for a period of time. And what happened was throughout the business, all the different business units were referring to the same concept of a customer, but they all had a different definition for what that customer was. So all these people are thinking that they're all moving in the same direction, talking about customers. They're all making decisions in the business for their customers, but they're all making decisions based off slightly different interpretations of that information. So unfortunately, in this case, this is one of the times where it went south. But what ended up happening was someone made quite a big public announcement based off that customer information, which turned out to be the wrong definition for what the public was expecting and ended up losing quite a few $1 million in the process. Unfortunately, that's as specific as I can get, but it just comes down to not speaking the same language across the business.
Okay. It's a common issue, right? So definition of metrics and how they're calculated and what they really mean in the business context, right? So you can have two people arguing about kind of metrics, and they're both right. Just they're talking about different definitions of what that entity or that metric is. So Kate, tell me about your experience at the University of New South Wales, the student experience. Do you have anything you can share with us?
Well, my role was actually created after two people turned up at a council meeting, which is like our board of directors, and they both had different versions of the same data, and it was based on different definitions. So that's how my position actually ended up being created. But immediately after that, I found a project that had been going around in circles for 2 years, and no one could work out why. And I sat down and met with them, and I realized the programmers were unable to program the solution because they were working with 13 separate definitions for the same thing. And I realized that we actually had a business definitions problem, and it was really good because it was the very start of my tenure as Chief Data Officer. So I was able to find a real problem, and it was a business glossary problem. So we sat down, we convened a group of people, we made a really good definition. My colleague Sonia came up with a really great definition. We all agreed it. We voted democratically on it, so there was consensus, and we implemented it. The programmers were able to program that, and that project finished after spending 2 years just wandering in the wilderness. So that was a really concrete example to people of the value of data governance and the need for sound business glossaries. So that was a really good way to kick off the data governance program. And then a whole lot of other projects came to me and said, we need the same kind of help. So it was kind of, it made people come to me instead of me having to go to them, which is always a good situation to be in.
That is awesome. That's a good one. So Greg, how about you?
Yeah, on a similar note, actually, it's interesting. Fred in the questions asked about how we're dealing with third-party applications in this regard. And look, one of the things is I tend to work on both sides of that fence. So I often do work in a lot, particularly large financials and things like that, where they're directly responsible for these sort of things. But most of them end up running third-party applications that have come from somewhere else, and I've done a lot of work in the software houses that build those sort of applications as well. And there's quite a different view of it in the two halves. In many cases, in the organizations that are using the applications, they will have, for example, checklists on what's required, all the way down, but that'll be interpreted very differently by the organization who's actually checking the boxes to say, our application meets this or whatever. And probably my biggest concern is that what I come across all the time in many of the larger software houses is, again, this sort of paying lip service, because what they're interested in is being able to tick enough boxes, not necessarily actually doing it properly, right? And then there's a very big difference between the two. In fact, one that I'm very mindful of, just straight off the top of my head, I mean, as an example, has a security officer, and you'd think this person was to do with security and governance, and you'd think that would be his role, right? But the problem is he could never get a single thing done. And it's not because he wouldn't find all the things that needed to be done. He couldn't ever get them funded to occur because the bosses didn't see any great value in that. However, every time they go into a meeting with a prospective client who asks security and governance questions, they would wheel out their security and governance person and go, "We have one." Even though it really was basically ineffective.
That's true. Jordan, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I see that so often. It's so hard, but at least in New Zealand, I can see that starting to change pretty quick, just because there's that financial liability there. I see another question there around some of the biggest challenges in data governance, and something that comes to mind that fits in with what Greg was saying as well was, we've been talking about GDPR and other regulations around the world that affect us and the way that we store our information. But often, like, the way we use data is changing as well. So traditionally, businesses were going out, they were building reports off their data warehouse, and that was pretty standard way. Might have a data mart or something like that. And you were doing those, looking back historically at your information. But now with like the emergence of machine learning and artificial intelligence, we're seeing all these forward-looking use cases where we're now using data to predict what will happen. And in a lot of these cases, it's really about personalization, and it's getting really specific into like targeted uses of data. And that poses a lot more questions around how we use data within the business. And there's going to be future use cases as well, which we don't know yet. And so when we think about data governance, we need to be building it in a way that can continually iterate and evolve to cope with these new use cases as well. Still allow us to leverage things like machine learning, but also protect us.
That's good. That's good. So let's unpack a little bit more about these kind of biggest challenges in data governance. The question that came from the audience. So, Kate, in your opinion, as you plan the roadmap of data governance for the University of New South Wales, so what are these challenges that you see ahead of you?
The big thing that really struck me when I first got this job was that data governance is a team sport. So we need to bring everybody to the table. So I brought together the risk folks, the cybersecurity folks, the information security folks, the IT folks, the privacy folks, and we all regularly meet and we plan stuff together. Because if you just take a data governance perspective and don't bring in all of those things, because data governance is essentially a risk management function, as is cybersecurity, information security. So we very much take that risk-based lens on it, and that's really important. The other thing is I think Greg's right, you need top-down pressure, but we kind of do a pincer movement above and below. So we are always communicating out to people how we want them to do stuff, and management. I actually got management on board by promising them that they'd never have to go to a meeting about data governance. And they've been very supportive after that. So you need to find ways that work for people. So I created a role called data executive, and that's a very senior person in our organisation who's responsible for a very broad area of data. So our Deputy Vice Chancellor Research is responsible for all research data. And I got him on board by promising him that if he blessed this and gave his support to it, he'd never ever have to attend a meeting in relation to data governance. And he was very happy to do that, let me tell you. And what I also got him to do was to then nominate data owners for specific areas, and getting the blessing from him and getting that passed down as something that someone needed to pay attention to meant that it got paid attention to. And that was a really important way to get buy-in. But then you've got to have all the bottom-up stuff of how you do stuff. There's no point just saying you need to do stuff in data governance. You need to be prescriptive about how you do it, but you also need to leave enough leeway for people to provide input into how best to implement data governance.
And let me ask you that.
Also throw in one, Fabio, too, is that one thing that is difficult when you start talking about third-party applications as well is that the order that you would hope things would happen in a business is that they would have a whole lot of things they would consider about the applications, including how they're going to deal in governance and security areas and things. And that would be looked at before you purchase it, right?
And that's what we do. We've inserted ourselves into the procurement process very early. So I bring the privacy folks along, the cyber folks. So we're all now engaged at the very start of a procurement process rather than being dragged in just before they implement. That's traditionally when we got engaged, and we go, oh my God, no, no, please no.
That's exactly it. So what happens in so many places I see is that the business will go and buy applications. They then bring them and then present them to the people who actually
like a dead rat. They just put a dead rat in the, it's like,
and then at that point, the IT folk have a choice of, well, we've bought this. It's like, you will implement it, right? And protests around, this does all these things all wrong. Where does that lie, right? I mean, to give you an example, I know a superannuation company application that people would pay hundreds of millions of dollars for, okay? And yet if you go to install it, the application requires that it's a security admin on the servers. Now, there's absolutely no reason why that's required. It's a very poor design decision by the authors. But once you've bought that and you've committed to hundreds of millions of dollars, what do the IT people in the organization do?
There you go. Leave this one right there.
Yeah, but that is why we've very specifically brought the risk cyber data governance people and the records management people into the procurement discussions now, especially for third-party apps and increasingly for software as a service, and we're actually doing external data sharing agreements now for software as a service applications, so that we have to have agreement as to how they're going to handle our data and everything. And they sign it as a contract, so it's enforceable. And that's something that we've done in the last couple of years. So we're becoming in a much stronger position now because we're engaged in a contractual process.
There you go. So Jordan, so just kind of putting all of that together that Greg and Kate just talked about. So if we look at your experience across Asia, do you see that happening? Do you see that working for the organizations you work with?
Well, there's a lot of shadow IT that's going on. You get that one department who can't get what they want easily, so they just go and buy it with a company credit card. And that has a whole lot of issues associated with it. I really like what Kate was talking about getting those data sharing agreements. I think that is pretty revolutionary. If you can get a vendor to sign a contract to say exactly how they're going to use your data, you've got them. But not only that, you've got them kind of working towards your data governance as well. So I guess one of the risks I see is the external or the third parties. And if you can get them on board with your data governance and be upfront about how you treat data and how they should be treating your data, I think that's really awesome.
That's good.
It's,
Again, though,
it's
those
also,
things have
it's
to.
also,
Oh, sorry, I was going to say those things have to have teeth, though, too, John. And so, to give you another example, I was in a software house where they have, say, 400 or 500 developers. They all have, in theory, masked copy of the customer's data because the customer said they won't let unmasked information get out of there. Yet then you find that they didn't mask it properly, and in fact, every single developer in the place has a copy of all of the pertinent information for the customer, right?
Yeah.
And again, there's nothing currently that almost requires them to tell the client that happened. Yet there's hundreds of people who could have done whatever with that data.
That's true.
That's
I think GDPR goes a little bit of the way there around defining who the processors of the data are and kind of detailing what they should be doing. I guess following through and proving that is the hard part.
That's right. So that's good. So Kate, I believe there's a question for you on the chat window. So hey, Kate, interested in the role of your record keepers play in the procurement discussions.
So what we do now is we've recently put out a policy saying that all university records either need to be in our records management system or a system of record, and we got people on board with that by going to them and saying, oh, you haven't had your system assessed as a system of record under the State Records Act. That means you need to put all your records in the records management system. So, you know, they've got a database with thousands of records in it and they're going, oh no, we don't want to do that. So it's encouraged a lot of internal systems to get assessed as systems of record, and then they can have remediation done if they're not meeting those requirements. And now we bring records management into the discussion in the procurement stage so we can assess potential applications for their meeting of the systems of records requirements before we buy them. And that's a fairly recent thing. And the other thing that we've done is we've got the consciousness in our lawyers when they're doing contracts now to make sure that the applications are meeting our data governance, cybersecurity and records management requirements. So all of that's now part of the contractual negotiations. And people may be aware that in Australia, pre-sales contractual discussions form part of the contract. So that's a valuable thing to have in the mix when you're forming the contract.
It's interesting with contracts, though. If you look at the ones that affect consumers, in many cases they can change over time, and it's not obvious to the consumer that even if they went to the trouble of checking out what they agreed to, it can then actually keep changing, right? And so, to give you an example, I got a thing from one of my mobile phone providers the other day that said, hey, we've updated the terms and conditions and the privacy stuff and how we deal with your data. And I thought, that's interesting. Now, I then went to their website, one of the few people I'm sure who ever did, and tried to find out what changed. And I couldn't work it out. And so what they had is they had a copy of here's the new policy, which is, you know, the size of something you can't jump over. And then I said, so I actually wrote back to them and I said, what's different about this policy to the previous one? Like, what did you change? I mean, I'll bet there's a handful of sentences they changed, but all they did is they then sent me a link saying, here's a PDF of the old one, and now they've got a website with the new one, which is so close to impossible to even compare. And that's the best they can provide as to what they changed. And so the thing is, so even if you agreed to something, if you have that sort of thing going on,
well,
that's soon after
on purpose, Greg.
I'm not
I used to be on
it's
that
not.
side of the fence writing those agreements. There's a reason they're all in 6-point font too.
Yeah. And so the thing is, in the end, you actually don't know what you've agreed to. And even if they had relatively strong controls, they could have loosened those or changed those, and you wouldn't know.
I suppose there's a difference, though, between us contracting B2B, so business to business with a formal contract that's enforceable at law, and a consumer contract, which is typically the terms can change at will of the supplier. So that's a different world. And having been on the supplier side, and writing those agreements, I used to be in a bank where I used to write those agreements, and we specifically reserved the right to change those at will and by publication on our website. And we didn't even have to notify people that they changed. And, that's very much about that asymmetry between the consumer and the corporation. And, they don't want to tilt that back in the favour of consumers.
There was one a little while ago where to sign up to the bank account, if you read the material, what you actually had to agree is that the local law did not apply. That this was an exception to the law, like how, yeah.
I love the legal aspects of data governance. So Jordan, you have any opinions on how complicated these can be?
Oh, it's tough. That's all I can say. Yeah. I think
agree.
Throughout the world, with the regulations changing, I think that's where it's going to force a lot of the companies to be a bit more open about these things. Speaking about examples of privacy policies changing, there is a company, Sharesies in New Zealand. I just recently got an email from them, and they said, privacy policies changed. Here's the 3 bullet points of what we think you need to know. So I think maybe that's a good example of that responsible disclosure up front in human readable text, not 6-point font. So
the question is, how long is it though, right? I mean, if you actually did an analysis of, the classic example is the EULAs with most software, right? I mean, does anybody actually ever read those? And so the question is, what is it you've agreed to, right? In fact, the most honest one I ever saw is I was clicking through an install of some software, and I clicked past the EULA, and it said, how could you possibly have read that in 1.04 seconds? And yeah, fair enough. They were right. I hadn't. Yeah. But at least they knew that wasn't possible.
So I've got a comment from Summit in the chat window. It's a long one, so I just wonder here if Summit would like to come on the mic and share his comments.
Oh, hi there. Yeah, I was just saying that, that there were discussions about, for example, people using company's credit card to, for example, bring in a vendor is kind of thrown at you, you have no idea, and you just have to accept it or reject it. I think there's a couple of things here. Firstly, with regards to a policy of the company, all of this has to begin at a program level, which then translate to whether you have some kind of a quality management system. Because this quality management system will define and lead to some kind of policy generation, which then leads to, these are the policies which are either coming from legislation, company policy, organization policies, and things like that, into a sort of a data governance architecture. And when you apply this to a set of vendors, so for example, if you were in an accountancy software, you're getting a Sage 200, or you were getting a Microsoft SQL Server 2000, just as a database vendor, let's call it any example, or another SAS. One of the examples that Greg mentioned is about, where you have to set up the admin as, the installer the first time, right? So all of these will actually evaporate because some of these vendors will not pass just that objective level of policy. And only because some of these softwares are not designed with a decoupled architecture, and therefore many of them will fail through no matter how good some of these systems are they profess to be. And then only when you have the remaining vendors can you actually begin to have a subjective discussion whether it fits your needs or not, is what I was saying.
Yeah, I think one of the problems of it is that if you look at, for example, superannuation systems, we're at the point there's only a handful in the market that are serious at all. And businesses, that isn't highest on the list of things they'll be worried about when they're buying it. Yeah, that's all I can say, is that the vast majority.
You're damn right.
Yeah.
You're damn right. I mean, there are, there's the vendor selection, and sometimes in a particular space, there's only few vendors. But in those cases, it's a matter of which is why the QMS is so important. What is the policy the company stand for? Yeah.
Look,
And if you
that's
follow,
really nice. That's a lovely perspective on things. But the reality is, so we had a thing where our HR people, they went and chose PageUp just before PageUp's major breach, and said, we're doing it. We've already signed. Make it work. All of us, so the risk, the privacy, the cyber people, we all looked at it and went, oh my God, no, we don't like this. And they said, it's a done deal, live with it. And then a couple of weeks later, PageUp had that major breach and we all had to deal with it. And that was a teachable moment for us because we had a fantastic example of, you did it, you didn't listen to us, you had a major breach. Next time, come to us first.
Well, I think it's also to do with the structural autonomy that a particular department enjoys within. And what sort of, if you don't have autonomy in the sense of doing your job, then you really can't really push your agenda through. But then if policies are there for a reason, because they are organizational wide. And can you make some other system which exists? So for example, for a superannuation system, yes, you can actually create an in-house system far more cheaply with actually that actually do present that kind of your principles and governance. Could this work? Or can you actually ask the vendor to customize it for you? All those kind of things. But what matters is what is important. Are the policies, are the governing principles of an organization? If you let them down, you're actually letting the whole thing down. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Shiva. So, any comments?
One comment about the building your own. It's interesting. There's one around town around the country that's widely used but wildly unpopular with customers. But it's interesting. I've been involved in several very NDA discussions with people who are trying to build a replacement, right? And that sort of thing. And so many of those projects, you just wouldn't believe how unsuccessful they are. In fact, even in-house things. There's one organization I was looking at yesterday where they've just canned yet another project. And this is something they're spending 7 figures on per month for multiple years already at this point. There was one I saw in the UK a while back where they were $360 million into the project when they killed it. The thing is, some of these things, you're talking about sizable projects. And actually, the one that fell over yesterday, the beautiful thing is that this is the second one in a row they've done similar stuff.
I give
you an example of one of the council where I used to work, and we had a system from Capita. Right from the day one the system came in, I'm based in the UK. Right from this time, the project, the system came in, it had problems of all sorts, and we knew that it's not going to work. And we tried to, we paid millions of pounds for the system, and then, but we already knew it, it's not going to work. And 3 years down the line, the CTO was sacked. And this is in the council. The head of department lost their job. Because even after 3 years, not only we had the problems with the system, but also there were these data leakages and all those problems. Despite KPMG raising a red flag about the things, despite pipelines being very untransparent and all that, but we continued this path. But looking back at that, and because there was a parallel effort to design something similar, we found that actually that had we done this in-house would be much better. But this choice is not always clear. I totally agree.
The thing that I would say there, that's not about data governance. That's about project governance, which is
Yep.
a whole nother can of worms, which we can open another time. The thing that I'm doing practically to try and address this stuff from a data and information governance and data security perspective is to work with our IT folks to start to build in privacy and security by design, and to roll that into the procurement process so that we can mandate it for everybody, for us internally and our partners. And that seems to me to be a good practice. And that's something that data governance can do. It can inform practice on the ground. So it's not just about data management, but it can be about development processes, because code is data too. And so you can actually, data covers a lot of things. So it's not just the data that you store, it's the code that you use to build stuff. And you can start to inform good practice as part of your data governance program.
That's exactly right, Kate. So I was just going to read an article yesterday saying that if you're using a sensitive data set to train a machine learning model, that trained model now becomes your sensitive data model, right? Sensitive trained. So it has to be kind of protected and managed in a similar way. That's a very good point. It's a very valid point. So far the discussions around data governance here between us have been around compliance, legislation, and protection, and making sure that we have the right controls on top of data. But let me switch gears here and focus more on the end users of an organization where data governance is in place. So what changes for the productivity users, for the data engineers who have to manipulate data in a daily manner to get get on with their activities? So how data governance will actually impact their lives in the way you see it? So let me start with you, Jordan.
I've got one example of a company that we're working with right now. We're working on a machine learning project with them. They have extremely sensitive data. They're in the health sector. And basically what they want to do is to leverage quite a large patient data set and then use that to predict a certain patient outcome. Now, just from the data handling alone, there is a huge amount of industry regulations that they have to follow in terms of how you handle that. But then also, the way that a lot of machine learning tools work right now is that it's very hard to kind of bake in those governance principles. And a technique that we've seen that's been emerging, say, the last 12 months or so, it's getting really good now. It's a concept called differential privacy, where you can basically take a sensitive data set, like a health data set, financial data set, something that's very sensitive, and you can run basically an algorithm on that data set that keeps the statistical relevance, but can change it enough that it's no longer representative of that original person, if that makes sense. And you can train a machine learning model off that and still get up to the same level of accuracy and results that you'd be looking for, because the data set still fundamentally has the same meaning in it. It just no longer could be directly related back to a person. And that's a one-way process, so you can't reverse that back to who the person originally was. So we saw that we use that quite a lot in terms of the approaches now for machine learning in those sensitive areas. But I'm also seeing that as an opportunity as well for sharing data with third parties. In the past, you might have aggregated and anonymized your data set, but now what you can do is run this differential privacy across it, and you actually can give people almost a more raw data set, but it doesn't actually expose any of the personal details of the people that data came from. So that other organizations can derive the benefit from that without actually compromising your customers.
There you go. So Greg?
Yeah, there's always a challenge in amongst that, in that, as you say, you've got to have enough data in the different categories to avoid it becoming obvious. Again, most of the funds I deal with will have a handful of special customers, members, for example, and you just know that if almost any of their data, even no matter how anonymized, ended up in test data sets and things, it would be obvious it was them.
There you go. Kate, any thoughts on that? You're on mute, Kate.
No, I'm not. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
we are here now. Good.
Okay. So I've been doing a lot of work with Dr. Ian Opperman on his Australian Computer Society data sharing task force for the last couple of years. And we've been doing a lot of thinking about how to share data safely using the 5 safes model. And we're very well progressed in that. And I can share that with Shiva so she can put out some share some documents about that. And because we're doing it as a university, you know, we've got all sorts of data. We've got, you know, clinical patient data from trials and stuff, right through to, you know, Indigenous data. So we really are dealing with very sensitive data sets all the time, and being able to share them safely between us and government and other collaborators is really important. And being able to do that at scale and automatically is the real challenge. And I think that's what Jordan is alluding to. And I think that's a really good approach, the sort of differential privacy approach. We don't have any good ways to do it automatically at scale yet. I think there are new approaches emerging, and I will be really interested if anyone has any ideas about this. Please get in touch. Really keen.
That's good. That's good. Being cautious of time here, I think I have one question that I wanted to ask all of you is, can you share your impressions so far about the announcement that Microsoft made back in December around Microsoft Purview for unified data governance? So can I start with you, Greg?
Look, again, that's an interesting one. For most of the customers I work with, that's still too early days for them. Certainly, I've not seen any that are committed to that yet. Many of them have been trying it and have had interesting outcomes. I mean, I think one of the biggest issues is obviously just finding out what it is you have in the first place, and that sort of thing's helpful.
Jordan, can I have your impressions?
Yeah, we've got a couple of projects running right now where customers have got it deployed. For customers who are new to data governance and are building their strategy at the same time, this almost kind of tips them over the edge and saying, yes, we need a tool like this to support the strategy. There are a lot of features coming up in the roadmap, which are really exciting. And the good news is because it's a SaaS product, because it's on Azure, you know, there's so many, the release cycle is so short these days that, you know, you deploy it now, you get comfortable with the features that are there. And then as the features continue to grow, you can actually grow your data governance policy with that. It's an interesting approach. But as a tool, yeah, it works really well.
Kate?
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. We're having a look at it right now. We were contemplating implementing data catalog last year when COVID hit and we all got sent home. So it kind of went on the back burner for us. So it's really good that this has come out, you know, as a kind of upgrade and turbocharging what functionality was available in data catalog. So we're having a serious look at it right now.
That's good. That's good. What I can say from a Microsoft perspective in terms of the capabilities that we've just recently announced during Ignite, we expanded the list of connectors for Purview to go multi-cloud. So now you can scan, for example, Amazon's S3 buckets. So and as we aim towards general availability in the next 3-4 months, you should expect that list of connectors where in terms of where the data is going to be located is going to be actually really interesting. And also, if you guys cast your memory back, I think it was beginning of last year, beginning of 2020, Microsoft acquired a company called Blue Talon that had a very interesting some data governance capabilities. So you should expect to see some announcements in terms of what happened to that Blue Talon acquisition and what's coming in the near future for data governance with Purview. So that's good one. That's good one. So guys, any final comments, any closure comments from you guys? Being cautious of time here, so I'll start with you, Jordan.
I'll keep it simple. There's no excuse not to have data governance.
That's a nice and short one. Kate.
Get started with data governance. By the way, I'm doing a talk tomorrow afternoon at the Australian Cybersecurity Conference on getting started with data governance. I'm sure the talk will be up on the web somewhere in the not too distant future, so keep an eye out for that.
There you go. Greg?
And the only thing I'd add is I think we need to still get a bunch more material that's targeted at the decision makers than is currently around at the moment, and I'd like to see that.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I think Rodney has his hands up. Rod,
yeah,
are you there?
Hey Fabio, nice to see you. Thanks guys, this is really interesting. We run a consultancy, and we deal, more kind of the implementation level. So we implement things like Purview for our customers, but I feel that there's this disconnect between this mutual understanding from our customers as to what they actually need. So we get asked things like, can you talk to us about data governance? And it's like, okay, we can, but it's how long is a piece of string? If you want a 6-week engagement or 8-week engagement, we can implement a tool that can help you with some of those things of data governance, but it's really at a higher level, this decision-making level. It needs buy-in from the whole company. It's a whole process and mindset change. How would you go about answering that question from a customer? Like, how do I get started with data governance?
There you go. Let me start with you, Greg.
As I said, my take on that is I think you need to convince appropriate team leaders and people, but I just so think you need to convince the decision makers. And for me, in many cases, my concern is that unless the penalties for doing the wrong thing are more obvious, more in your face, and regularly enforced, then that still makes it tough.
That's right. Jordan?
From my point of view, I think I'm in a similar position where, I'm coming in as a consulting company, bringing in a data strategy. We can give them a framework and a template for implementing data governance, but the reality is they have to be able to implement it in a way that fits their culture and their business and their industry and all of these things. So I don't think there is a simple way for us to, across the board, help everybody produce the perfect data governance strategy without us specifically consulting on data governance. The one other thing I'll add to that is there are some good resources out there. For example, the AI Business School from Microsoft, while that is specifically in the context of AI, it has some really good executive focused content around responsible use of data, putting in good controls around access and data sharing and things like that. So that might be a good place for them to start at least talking about it. And you can then provide some, I guess, some base materials to kind of get going. Yeah.
I suppose the thing that's interesting there, Jordan, is how the average decision maker would come to find that.
Yeah.
Kate, your thoughts on that one? You didn't press mute. It's still mute.
Sorry, this
There you go.
unmuting is very slow. So
you went back on mute.
It just muted itself. I don't know
there
why.
You go.
Anyway, I've got a series of steps, and the first step I talk about is for starting data governance is to get a mandate, and that's really to have the conversations at the executive level in the organisation to get their buy-in to the whole concept. Because if you don't get that first, all your subsequent discussions will be futile. So get a mandate first, and then start the conversations around the rest of the organisation. So I think Greg's right. You've got to get that executive mandate, and you need to have their buy-in. Otherwise, it's never going to go anywhere. And if you don't have that executive buy-in, you're very unlikely to get any funding. So you're going to be hamstrung throughout the entire program.
That's exactly right. So Rod, I hope that answers your question. So
yes,
guys, that's awesome. Thank you. So being conscious of time, you're right on time. I would like you folks to pay attention to the links that Sarah provided in the chat window for the survey, and the links to the Azure Purview as a call to action to see exactly what Purview is and how it can help data governance. On that note, I would like to thank Greg, Kate, and Jordan today for their participation. It's a great discussion to talk to you guys. Pleasure to have you here today. And for everyone who joined the call, again, thank you very much for your participation and your questions. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I see you next time.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks all.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. That was really good.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.